Hi, I'm Brent Russell, owner of Tarrant County Pest Control, and this is part 3 of recognition of pest and pest damage. This is B3 of the Apprentice training video. And to start off, we're going to start talking about ants. Ants live in colonies and are considered social insects. Ants have 4 life stages. If you'll notice this chart and look in the top left corner, the life cycle starts with the queen laying some eggs. The eggs develop into larvae. The larva develops into pupa, and the pupa into an adult. The adults could either be a worker, male, female, or a queen. Normally, only adult worker ants are seen, as these are the foragers and defenders of the colony. Ants are predominant insect predators and scavengers. Of the approximately 700 species found in the United States, around 40 species are considered economically important as pests. They have come to be the #1 pest in the U.S., gaining entry into residence, commercial, and industrial structures. Ants are divided into subfamilies. This division is made accordingly to a variety of characteristics. Between the thorax and the abdomen is found 2 segments called nodes. These 2 nodes are used to identify the different types of ants. Most ants in Texas are easily identified by whether they have 1 node or 2 nodes, especially if you're trying to identify carpenter ants. So let's talk about the 2-node ants. Most Texas ants with 2 nodes are in the subfamily that include fire ants, theft ants, pavement ants, Acrobat ants, Pharaoh ants, little black ants, harvester ants, and leafcutter ants. Okay, let's take a look at the fire ants first. Here's a really good photograph of a fire ant. You can clearly see between the thorax and the abdomen. If you look at this ant, starting at the head, you got the head, then the thorax, then the abdomen. That's one of the distinctive signs of an insect, is that they're going to have 3 body regions and they're going to have 6 legs. Now, if you look between the thorax and the abdomen, you will see those 2 bumps. And those 2 bumps are the nodes that we look for that help us identify ants. What's interesting about this photo also is that you can clearly see on the end of the abdomen is the stinger that sticks out, that has the poison in it when these fire ants sting you. The thing that's interesting about that is that a lot of people think fire ants bite you, but they don't actually bite you. What they do is they sting you like a wasp, but that stinger doesn't come out. They can sting you over and over and over again several times. So fire ants are from about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch in length. The antenna has 10 segments and the ends in a 2-segmented club. Species are differentiated by observing the mandibles. There are native and imported fire ants in the United States. Another interesting fact about fire ants is that when you step in a fire ant mound, they will wait until they cover your feet or your legs before they all start stinging, so that they can all be on you and start stinging and attack you at the same time. The way that they're able to do this is, you see, ants don't have ears, so they communicate with pheromones. When they get on you, the soldier ants start crawling on you and wait for more ants to get on, and then they release a pheromone that tells the other ants to start to attack. So that's why it'll seem like they all start stinging you at the same time, because they actually do. Once that pheromone is released that tells the rest of them to attack, then they all start stinging over and over again. Not a very pleasant thing to go through. Okay, now let's take a look at the theft ant. Here is a photo that makes it really easy to be able to see what we're talking about, the nodes. Here you can clearly see the head, the abdomen, and the thorax. Right between the abdomen and the thorax are the two nodes. Also notice that on this picture it shows that this ant has 10 segments to its antenna. This is another thing that we do in identifying ants, is by counting the segments in the antenna. Now the theft ant is a very small, light brown or yellow ant. It's less than a 1/16 of an inch. The antenna has 10 total segments, which ends in a 2-segmented club. So if you notice on this photo, on the end of its antenna, it has a 2-segmented club. That big part of the end of the antenna is known as the club. The pavement ant. Pavement ants are small, dark brown ants about 1/10 to 1/8 of an inch in length. Antennae are 12-segmented and end in a 3-segmented club. The thorax has 1 pair of spines, heavily sculpturing on the head and thorax, which forms narrowest parallel grooves. Okay, now let's take a look at the Acrobat ant. Now, the Acrobat ant is another one of the 2-node ants that are very popular in North Texas. The Acrobat ant is a light brown to a dark brownish black. The antenna has 12 segments and 3-segmented club. The abdomen is shaped like a heart. Now, this is an easy one to positively identify, especially if you have a magnifying glass or a little jeweler's doublet, because if you look closely at the abdomen, it's shaped like a heart. There's not any other ants that I know of that have this heart-shaped abdomen, so it makes it very easy to make a positive identification. Plus, it's a 2-node ant. And Carpenter ants are not 2-node ants, they're 1-node ants. And this ant, I think, is misidentified more than any other ant I can think of, because most people will think that these are Carpenter ants. It's clearly not. When you look at the nodes, you can see that it's a 2-node ant. Plus, you look at the abdomen and you see it's a heart-shaped. But this ant is very similar to Carpenter ants. They get into the wood and they make little piles of sawdust, but they're not Carpenter ants, and so technically we do not write them up as a wood-destroying insect. We do not classify them as a carpenter ant. They're just considered a nuisance ant. They don't do as much damage as a carpenter ant, but you can see it's very important to take the time to properly identify these ants, especially this ant, because in this case, it's very easy to mistake it as a carpenter ant, and that could cost your customer much more money to treat carpenter ants than acrobat ants. Now, it's not unusual that when I find these ants, if they're trailing or they're in a window somewhere, that probably outside that window is going to be a crepe myrtle. I don't know why, but these ants seem to love crepe myrtle trees. If there's a crepe myrtle out there, I would take a look at that, or just generally look in the landscaping outside the window that these ants are in, and there's a good chance that you'll find them trailing, and if you can find them trailing, then you can be very successful at treating these ants. Pharaoh ants. These ants are really tiny. These are small little ants about a 1/16 of an inch long. They're two-node ants, and their antenna has 12 segments with a 3-segmented club. Now these Pharaoh ants are so small that they're actually hard to see. Sometimes they'll be trailing and you don't even see them at all. So if you go into a house and you got some really tiny ants, if you see them, you're definitely going to need a jeweler's doublet or a good magnifying glass to be able to check out if they're two-node ants or not. Pharaoh ants can be rather difficult to get rid of. They can be very numerous in their colonies, and they can be very mobile. I see these ants can survive inside the middle of a structure, inside a house, where they don't even have contact with the outside wall. If these ants can find food and water inside a house, they will eat anything. They're sweet-eating ants. They'll eat greases, sugars, um, just about anything that they can find. So if they can find food and water within a structure, they won't go outside, which can make them very difficult to get rid of. So you have to find them and treat them locally where they're at. Pharaoh ants, the thing to remember about them, they're two-node ants. They're very tiny, and they can be very difficult to get rid of. The little black ant. Believe it or not, the technical name for this ant is actually called the little black ant. Now there is a scientific name. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but this is what this ant is officially called. This ant is a very small little black ant, about a 1/16 of an inch long. But because it's such a solid black, it's not that hard to spot these ants. The antenna has 12 segments and a 3-segmented club, and it's closely related to the Pharaoh ant. They're both about the same size, but like I say, these ants are easier to spot because of their color. The little black ant is a sweet-eating ant. These guys will get into just about anything. There's a lot of nicknames for these ants because they are so common. A lot of times, if people have ants in their kitchen, they're either going to be Pharaoh ants or little black ants. Harvester ants. If I was to pick a favorite ant, I would probably have to pick the harvester ant. I just like these ants, and it's kind of a shame that they're almost have gone extinct, that you just don't hardly see these ants anymore. Um, Believe it or not, the fire ants have just about killed off the harvester ants. Now, these ants were the main food source for the horned toad that lived in Texas. And when I was a kid, you used to be able to find horned toads all the time. They're real common. But when we started getting the red imported fire ant, they started destroying and killing all of the harvester ants. The harvester ants are really easy to tell that it's a harvester ant colony, because these are the ants that when you see their nest, it's not like a mound of dirt like a fire ant makes, but these guys will have cleared away all the dirt for about a foot all the way around their hole. And then right in the middle, there'll be a little hole just like this in the middle of their mound. And they enter in and out through this hole. Uh, these ants are a pretty good size. They're big. A lot of people just refer to them as red ants, or these big red ants. They don't have stingers, but they do have these big, large mandibles uh, that they can pinch you with, and it really hurts. Anybody can tell you that's gotten into red ants that they really have a bite that really, really is not fun to get bit by a harvester ant. So these ants, they range in about a fifth of an inch up to a half an inch. They're like I say, they're pretty good sized ants. They're red to a black in color. They're a two-node ant with a row of hairs on the underside of the head. That's the harvester ant. You don't see very many of these harvester ants anymore, like I said, and it's kind of a shame. I was actually out at Village Creek Watercross Park one time, and there was a big harvester ant mound sitting right next to where we were sitting at with the dirt bikes. And I asked the owner of the land if he would like me to kill those ants for him. And he said to me, you know, you just don't see many of these harvester ants anymore. He said, I think I'd rather you not kill those. And I think I agree with him. I kind of like these ants. Okay, and this is the last of the two-node ants that we're going to take a look at today that are of the most popular or the most common two-node ants that we see in Texas. This one is simply called the leafcutter ant. And as you can see, this ant cuts leaves. It's got a very appropriate name. You will see these ants cutting leaves and then trailing down a tree, and you'll literally see these pieces of leaves moving down a tree sometimes. So these ants will go up into a tree, they'll cut a piece of leaf, they'll go down, back down the tree and into their nest. Then they take these leaves and they put them in the nest, and they start to rot and grow a fungus on them. And then when the larvae hatches out, they feed off of that fungus that grows on these leaves. And that's what these ants live on. So that's how they get their name, leafcutter ants. So the leafcutter ant colonies contain as many as 14 different size of workers, ranging anywhere from a 16th of an inch to a half inch. That's one of the things when you're identifying ants that you can look at, is some species have all different size ants within the species, like this leafcutter ant. So if you were looking at these ants and every one of the ants was exactly the same size, like they would be with Acrobat ants, then you would know that these were not leafcutter ants, because you would expect them to see them in all different sizes. The head contains several pairs of spines. Antenna has 11 segments with no easily defined club. So that's another thing that you can look at for besides the two nodes, is you can look for those spines that are on the back of this ant. Kind of a mean looking spines on there. That's the leafcutter ant, and that's the last of the two-node ants that we're going to look at. Now let's take a look at some one-node ants. And one of the first ones we're going to look at is the carpenter ant, because this is one of the ways that you can positively identify a carpenter ant. As we talked about, there's some other rather large red and black ants that are out there. Fire ants are red and black, and they can get kind of big. Acrobat ants are red and black, but they're a two-node ant. So if you see these ants, and if you can count the nodes on them, you'll know right away if they're a two-node ant, it is not a carpenter ant. So when you do find a large red and black ant with one node on it, that's a positive identification for a carpenter ant. Carpenter ants are large ants. The workers range up to 5/8 of an inch. Evenly rounded thorax. Carpenter ants create galleries in wood and throw out their frass. So, what these ants do is they actually burrow into the wood just like termites. However, you will not see the mud or the dirt that's associated with termites that when you see carpenter ants. What you'll see are clean galleries, and you'll see piles of sawdust sometimes for when they're throwing it out. Now what they do is they have what's called kick holes. So when they go in and they take out a little piece of wood, they go to the kick hole and they throw that little piece of wood out, which is actually to us more like a little piece of sawdust. And this little piece will fall down, and sometimes if it's in, say, around a window, people will call up and they say, I'm seeing a little pile of sawdust in my window frame. That's from these carpenter ants. If you see these red and black ants, identify them, make sure they're carpenter ants and not acrobat ants, and if they are, then you'll be able to treat them right, because it's very important that you know what they are and that you follow the label and that you treat them properly and you identify them properly. And that is a carpenter ant. Okay, let's take a look at some more carpenter ants. Here is a black one. Here's a red and a black one with wings. So as you can see, the color doesn't necessarily tell you if it's a carpenter ant or not. It could be solid black. The solid black ones are the females, and the red and black ones are the males. They can also have wings, or they may not have wings. When they're swarming, they're going to have wings, and so that can be commonly mistaken for as a termite. And we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between ants and termites a little bit later. And then here's a picture finally of some of the sawdust that you can look for that you'll see commonly associated with carpenter ants. Okay, now let's talk about crazy ants. Crazy ants is another one-note ant. It's extremely long legs and antenna, and the first segment of the antenna is more than twice as long as the length of the head. Hairs on the body arranged in pairs. The crazy ant is given its name because of the way it runs around really fast and crazy. So if you see an ant that looks like this and it's moving really fast and crazy, it's a good chance that's a crazy ant. Okay, now I want to show you the raspberry crazy ant. This is an interesting ant because it's a new ant that we just found in Texas. It's a newly introduced crazy ant is spreading through Texas, and it's called the raspberry crazy ant because it's named after a pest control operator down in Houston who actually discovered it, and his name was Tom Rasberry. Now the raspberry crazy ant reproduces at a rapid rate, and it displaces other ants and other arthropods that are in the area. So the crazy ant is probably not something that you would see in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I don't think that any of them have been spotted in the Dallas-Fort Worth area or even reported in this area. All right, now let's take a look at the Argentine ant. The Argentine ant is a very popular ant that I see in a lot of houses. It's not uncommon at all to see very large colonies of Argentine ants trailing down the side of houses, down driveways, across the back of fences, even across telephone wires from a telephone pole to a house. These guys can be huge in numbers. These are the ones where fire ants can be a couple thousand in a colony, or Argentine ants can be 200,000 in a colony. They don't bite, they don't sting, but they are definitely a nuisance ant. They can get into things, they can get in electrical boxes and create problems. They get into food. Ants in general can spread diseases. Especially in hospitals, this is a big problem when you've got ants that can be so numerous. So Argentine ants, very common ant that we have. They can be a little bit difficult to get rid of just because they can be so huge just in numbers. But if you properly identify this ant and treat it according to the label, they can be easily taken care of. Okay, and now the last of the one-note ants is another very common ant that I see a lot. It's the Argentine ant is real popular, but also this is called the odorous house ant. The reason that it's called an odorous house ant is because if you crush this ant and smell it, it has a smell of like rotten coconuts when you smell it. So that's how it got the name the odorous house ant. It's a small ant, about an eighth of an inch long. It is flattened and not visible. I'm sorry, it has one node that is flattened and is not visible from above because it's hidden by its abdomen. You don't really identify this ant by it having one node. You can kind of look at it at the size and the color. You'll get used to seeing these ants, and then to identify it, you can crush one between your fingers and smell it. And if it has that rotten coconut odor smell to it, then you know it's definitely the odorous house ant. Okay, now let's talk about the differences between ants and termites and how to properly identify an ant from a termite. Alright, first of all, let's take a look at an ant. An ant has elbowed antennae, and it's going to have a narrow waist, kind of like a wasp. Those are two of the things that you can look for when you're looking for the difference between an ant and a termite. Those are the first two things that you're going to want to look at. Okay, now let's take a look at a termite. The termite's antenna, as you can see, is straight. It is not elbowed, and the waist is thick. Now, the termite is an insect, so it does have three body regions: a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. However, because the thorax and the abdomen are so wide, it's just hard to be able to distinguish between the thorax and the abdomen. You can't see, there's no gap in between them. Now, another thing about termites is their wings. Both pair of the wings are going to be the same size, and they're going to be very long compared to an ant's wings. Okay, so with that being said, let's take a look at this. What does this look like to you? Is this an ant or a termite? Okay, so this is an ant, and you can tell that it's an ant clearly by the antenna. You can see that it's got that curved or elbowed antenna, and also it's kind of hard to see through the wings, but this has a very narrow waist on it, and the wings are different sizes, as well as not as long as a termite's wings, which are going to be almost twice the size of its body. So when you look at this, you can see the elbowed antenna, the narrow waist, the different size wings, definitely an ant. Okay, and let's take a look at this. Is this an ant or a termite? It's an ant. Once again, the small waist and the elbowed antenna. Ant or termite? Termite. Wide waist, straight beaded antenna. Which one is the ant? The one on the left.